A few summers back, I pulled into a campsite after a long drive, tired, ready to grab a cold drink out of the fridge, and opened that door to find everything inside sitting warm. Not room temperature warm, but warm enough that I knew something had gone wrong somewhere along the way, and I knew it hadn't just happened in the last hour. The milk had gone off, the lunch meat didn't smell right, and I ended up tossing out a good portion of what I'd stocked up on just 2 days before. I spent the better part of that evening chasing down what I figured had to be a serious problem. Checked my propane level, plenty there. Checked my battery connections, tightened up a couple that looked a little loose just in case. Even pulled out the manual and started reading up on the cooling unit itself, half convinced I was looking at an expensive repair or maybe even a whole new fridge. Already dreading the phone calls I'd have to make to find a shop that could look at it anytime soon. Took me embarrassingly long to finally notice the actual problem, and once I did, I felt like a fool for not checking it first. My door wasn't sealing right. Not broken, not cracked, just not sealing the way it was supposed to. And that gap, small as it was, had been letting warm air creep in steady enough to undo everything that little cooling unit was working so hard to accomplish. I'm telling you that story because I don't want you spending an evening the way I did, tearing through manuals and worrying about a big repair bill, when the real problem might be sitting right there in that door seal the whole time. And here's the good news. Once you know what to look for, fixing this doesn't cost you a service call, and it doesn't cost you much more than $1. Today I'm going to show you exactly how to test whether your seal's the problem, exactly how to fix it once you know that's what's going on, and how to keep it from happening again come next season. Now, before I get into the test and the fix, I want to explain one more thing that makes this problem hit RVers harder than it hits folks at home, and it comes down to the kind of fridge you're probably running. Most RVs use what's called an absorption fridge, which works completely different from the compressor fridge you've got in your kitchen at home. A home fridge uses a compressor to actively pump refrigerant and force cold air where it needs to go. Powerful enough to recover pretty quick, even if the door's left open a while or the seal's not perfect. An RV absorption fridge works off a much gentler process, using heat from propane or electricity to drive a chemical cycle that produces cooling, and it just doesn't have anywhere near the same brute force to fight back against warm air sneaking in. That's exactly why a seal problem that a home fridge might shrug off without you ever noticing can turn into spoiled food and a warm fridge in an RV within a day or two. Sometimes less if you're parked somewhere hot and the outside temperature's working against that gentle cooling process, even harder. Your absorption fridge is working with a much smaller margin, and a bad seal eats into that margin fast. Let's start with why this happens in the first place. Because RV fridges deal with a problem home fridges almost never have to face. And understanding it changes how you think about that yearly storage routine you've probably been doing without a second thought. When you put your rig into storage for the winter, or even just leave it sitting for a few weeks between trips, you're supposed to prop that fridge door open a crack to keep mildew and odors from building up inside that sealed, damp little box. Makes sense, and it's good advice. One you've probably heard from every RV forum and every dealer walkthrough you've ever sat through. But here's what nobody tells you. Propping that door open for weeks or months at a time puts that rubber gasket in a position it's not designed to hold long term. And over time, that rubber actually takes on what's called a compression set. Basically, it remembers being held open in that spot. And even once you close the door back up and get ready to travel again after weeks or months of sitting, that gasket doesn't spring back to its original shape the way it used to. You end up with a slight gap, sometimes so small you can't even see it with your eyes, but big enough for warm air to sneak through every single time that fridge cycles on and off throughout the day and night. Now, before you go hunting for a replacement gasket or calling somebody out to look at it, I want you to run a real simple test that's going to tell you for certain whether the seal's your problem, and it happens to use exactly the same dollar you're going to use for the fix, which is a nice bit of luck if you ask me. Take a plain dollar bill, open your fridge door, and lay that bill across the seal at one spot, then close the door on it. Now pull that bill out slow and steady. If your seal's doing its job, you should feel a good bit of resistance the whole way, like the door's really gripping onto that bill and not wanting to let it go easy. Do this same test, moving around the entire perimeter of the door, top, bottom, both sides, and pay close attention to how much resistance you feel at each spot. Pay especially close attention to the corners, because that's where a lot of seals fail first, and where the test can be a little trickier to read. The rubber has to curve and fold differently at a corner than it does along a flat stretch, and that extra bend is exactly where cracking and flattening tend to show up earliest. Test each corner separately from the straight sections, moving the bill an inch or two at a time rather than just doing one test dead center of each side and calling it good. A gasket can hold perfectly fine in the middle of a run and still be failing right where it turns the corner. And if you only test the middles, you'll walk away thinking everything's fine when it isn't. If you hit a stretch where that bill slides out smooth and easy, almost no resistance at all, you've just found your leak. Mark that spot in your head, or stick a little piece of tape nearby so you remember exactly where it was, because that's where we're going to focus our fix. Don't be surprised if you find more than one weak spot either, especially if your rig's a few years old or has been through a couple winters of storage with the door propped. It's common to find a couple different trouble spots rather than just one single culprit, and that's fine. You're going to treat each one the same way, regardless of how many you find. Here's the fix itself, and I want to walk you through two parts to it, because depending on what you find during that dollar bill test, you might need one or both. The first part addresses a seal that's just gotten dirty, dried out, or lost a little bit of its natural flexibility over time, which happens to every gasket eventually just from regular use and exposure to temperature swings. For this, you want a small tub of plain petroleum jelly, the same stuff you'd find in any bathroom medicine cabinet, running you right around $1 at any store. Before you apply anything though, take a clean damp rag and wipe the entire gasket down first, front to back, getting into every fold. You'd be surprised how much crumb debris, sticky residue, and general grime builds up in those folds over time, especially in the galley area where food's constantly being packed in and pulled back out in a hurry. That grime alone can be enough to keep a gasket from sealing properly, even if the rubber itself is in decent shape. So don't skip straight to the petroleum jelly without cleaning first. Once that gasket's clean and dry, take a clean rag or an old toothbrush and work a light coating of that petroleum jelly all the way around the gasket, getting it into every fold and crease. You don't need to glob it on thick. A thin, even coating is all it takes. And in fact, too much can actually attract more dust and debris over time, working against you rather than for you. That petroleum jelly does two things for you. First, it conditions that rubber, keeping it soft and pliable instead of letting it stay stiff and brittle, which is exactly what causes a seal to stop gripping the way it should. Second, it actually fills in tiny imperfections and hairline cracks in the rubber surface, creating a better seal even in spots where the rubber itself has started to wear. Run your dollar bill test again after doing this, and on a lot of fridges, that alone is enough to fix the problem completely. Now, if you've got a spot where that gasket's actually developed a real crease or a flattened section from being propped open too long, the petroleum jelly alone might not be enough, because you're not just dealing with dry rubber, you're dealing with rubber that's physically holding the wrong shape. This is where the second part of the trick comes in, and it's one that mechanics and old-timers have been using on rubber seals of all kinds for decades, from car door seals to old refrigerator gaskets, long before RVs ever had absorption fridges built into them. You're going to gently warm that section of gasket to relax the rubber enough that it lets go of that compression set and settles back into its proper shape. Take a hairdryer, set it on low heat, and hold it about 8 to 10 inches away from the affected section of the gasket, keeping it moving constantly, never holding it still in one spot. You're not trying to blast that rubber with heat, you're just warming it gently, the same way you'd warm up a stiff muscle before stretching it. After 30 seconds or so of that gentle moving heat, that rubber's going to feel noticeably more pliable to the touch. While it's still warm and soft, Use your fingers to gently work that crease back out, pressing and smoothing the rubber back toward its original rounded shape. Once you've got it looking right, hold the door closed, or use a strip of painter's tape to hold that section pressed into proper position, and let it cool and set for a good 20 minutes before you check it again. I also want to mention a second possible cause, because sometimes the gasket itself is perfectly fine, but the door still isn't sealing right, and that points you toward the hinges and the latch instead of the rubber. Same as we talked about with cabinet doors and entry doors on other videos, an RV fridge door can shift out of alignment over time from road vibration, especially if you're the type who tows through a lot of rough terrain or gravel roads chasing your favorite boondocking spots. If your dollar bill test shows resistance that's uneven all the way around, tight on one side and loose on the opposite side rather than one isolated weak spot, that's usually a sign the door itself isn't sitting flush anymore against the frame. Not that the gasket's damaged at all. Most RV fridge doors have small adjustment screws on the hinges, sometimes visible right on the outside edge of the door, sometimes tucked just inside when you open it up and look closely along the frame. Loosening those slightly and gently shifting the door before retightening can often correct that uneven pressure without you needing to touch the gasket at all, and it usually takes no more than a few minutes with a simple screwdriver. It's worth checking this first if your seal problem seems to be affecting one whole side of the door rather than a single isolated stretch, since no amount of petroleum jelly or gentle heat is going to fix a door that's simply hanging crooked. I want to caution you on something important here, because I don't want anybody rushing this step and doing more harm than good. Do not use a heat gun for this, and do not hold a hairdryer up close on high heat thinking it'll work faster or save you a few minutes. Rubber gaskets can scorch, melt, or warp permanently if you get them too hot too fast. And once you've damaged that rubber that way, you've turned a $1 fix into a full gasket replacement, which is exactly what we're trying to avoid here in the first place. Low heat, constant movement, and patience is the whole trick. If you're not seeing that rubber relax after a minute or so of gentle warming, stop and let it rest a few minutes before trying again, rather than cranking up the heat trying to force it. Let me tell you what happened with my own fridge once I finally figured out what was going on that evening I told you about. Turned out my seal had a flattened stretch right along the bottom, exactly where the door had been propped during storage the winter before. I hadn't thought a thing about propping that door open. Did it every single year like you're supposed to. But I never once considered that doing the right thing for one problem, keeping mildew out, was quietly creating a different problem come spring. It's one of those things that seems obvious once somebody points it out to you, but it never once crossed my mind in all the years I'd been doing it the exact same way. Ran the hairdryer trick on that flattened section, worked it back into shape with my fingers, held it with a little tape overnight just to be safe, and by the next morning that section looked just as rounded and full as the rest of the gasket. Ran my dollar bill test all the way around after that, even resistance everywhere, and that fridge has kept things properly cold ever since. Didn't cost me a dime beyond what I already had sitting in my medicine cabinet, and I've never once had to think about that gasket going bad on me again, because now it's just part of my regular routine instead of something I only think about after the food's already gone warm. I also want to give you a habit that would have saved me that whole evening of chasing down the wrong problem in the first place. Every time you take your rig out of storage, before you even load up the fridge with groceries, run that dollar bill test around the whole door. Takes you 2 minutes, and it tells you right away whether you're dealing with a seal problem before you ever get out on the road and start wondering why your food's spoiling faster than it should. I'd also recommend doing a light coat of that petroleum jelly on the gasket at the same time, right as part of your regular startup routine, since keeping that rubber conditioned regularly means you're a lot less likely to run into cracking or drying out in the first place. And it's a whole lot easier to maintain a good seal than to fix a bad one after the fact. While we're on the subject of storage, I want to offer a small tweak to how you prop that door open, because it might help you avoid this whole problem to begin with. Instead of propping the door wide open against the gasket's full range, which is what causes that compression set we talked about earlier, Try using a small block or a rolled-up towel positioned to hold the door open just a couple inches, resting the door against something other than stretching the gasket itself to its limit. Some RVers even remove the gasket entirely during long-term storage and set it aside somewhere flat and cool, though that's a bigger step than most folks want to bother with for a seasonal trip. Even just being more mindful of how wide you're propping that door and for how long can cut down on how often you're dealing with this compression set problem come springtime. Let's talk about what this actually saves you, because a bad seal costs you more than just spoiled food, even though that's bad enough on its own, especially if you're a few days into a trip and lose a fridge full of groceries you can't easily replace out in the middle of nowhere. A fridge working overtime to compensate for a leaky seal is drawing more power or burning more propane than it needs to, which matters a lot if you're boondocking and trying to stretch your battery bank or your tank as far as it'll go. That extra draw adds up quicker than you'd think, especially on a longer trip where you're relying on that battery bank to also run your lights, your water pump, and everything else without a chance to fully recharge every single night. Over time, that extra strain can also shorten the life of your cooling unit itself, since it's running harder and longer than it was ever designed to. And a cooling unit replacement on these absorption-style fridges is one of the more expensive repairs you can run into on an RV, often costing more than the fridge itself was worth when you bought it. And if you do end up needing a full gasket replacement because a bad seal went unaddressed for too long, you're looking at anywhere from $50 to over $150, depending on your fridge model, plus labor if you have somebody else install it for you. Some of the less common fridge models can run even higher if the gasket has to be special ordered rather than picked up off a shelf, which adds shipping time on top of the cost, meaning your fridge might sit out of commission for a week or two, waiting on a part while you're trying to plan a trip around it. Compare that to a dollar bill you already had in your wallet and a tub of petroleum jelly you can pick up on the way through any grocery store, and there's really no comparison at all. I want to hear from you on this one. Drop a comment down below and tell me if you've ever chased down a fridge problem that turned out to be something this simple, or if you're the type who already runs the dollar bill test every season without ever having to think twice about it. I know I'm not the only one who spent an evening convinced I was looking at a serious repair, only to find out the fix was sitting in my medicine cabinet the whole time. And I'd love to hear I'm not alone in that particular brand of frustration. If you've got a different old trick for conditioning rubber seals, maybe something your family's used for generations that isn't petroleum jelly, share that too. Because I know there's more than one way folks have solved this over the years, and I'd love to hear what's worked for you. Before I let you go, if your rig's coming out of storage soon, or if you've noticed your fridge running warmer than it used to, don't wait around wondering what's wrong, and don't start dreading an expensive repair bill before you've even confirmed there's a real problem. Grab a dollar bill, run that test around the whole door, corners included, and if you find a weak spot, you've already got everything you need sitting around the house to fix it tonight. It's a fix that costs you next to nothing and takes less time than it took me to tell you this whole story. And it just might save you a fridge full of groceries the next time you pull into a campsite, tired and looking forward to a cold drink. I'm Hank Dawson. Thank you kindly for listening to Roadside Wisdom, and I'll see you in the next one.